Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to today's IAEG webinar looking at US TSCA. The EPA issued final rules regarding the 5 PBT chemicals. For some of you that may not joined a webinar with the Engage platform, I'm just going to do a couple housekeeping items before getting it over to the IAEG crew. My name is Madison Adams, and I work at NonCompliance. I'm just helping facilitate the webinar today. The system is very customizable, so you will be able to move the audio, slides, and question and answer panels around to the size that you prefer. If you happen to move them around or remove one of them by accident, that very first button on the bottom left-hand side is the revert back to the original layout of the platform. That will bring you back to what it looked like when you logged in this morning. All of the buttons along the bottom have different functionalities. The one that's probably the most of interest to those on the line is the very last one, which is the handout section, and it has links to the IAEG website as well as a downloadable copy of the slides. Today's webinar program will be recorded, so you will be able to access it through the same way that you joined this morning's presentation. We also will be taking some questions at the end. You can do so by typing that in that question and answer panel that shows up on the left-hand side of your screen. Feel free to engage with us as we move along with the presentation. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay.
Thank you, Madison. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this International Aerospace Environmental Group webinar on the TSCA PBT Rule and the analysis of potential impacts on aerospace and defense and its chemical supply chain. My name is Lindsay Bean, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Currently, I am a member of the Corporate Environmental Sustainability team within Northrop Grumman, where I'm responsible for leading environmental policy and analysis, planning, and engagement efforts, as well as developing our environmental disclosures. Within IAEG, I serve as the communications sub-team lead for IAEG Workgroup 9, who's putting this webinar on today. As many of you know, Workgroup 9 is chartered to review, prioritize, and develop communications for the IAEG membership on new regulations that will have an impact on the aerospace and defense industry. Since the establishment of Workgroup 9 in 2019, we have released 17 regulatory alerts, 2 fact sheets, and this is our second webinar. Hopefully many of you have seen some of the work products that Workgroup 9 has released, either through direct email or for those that are IAEG members, or posted on our website at IAEG.com or through LinkedIn communications. If you're interested in learning more about any of these topics, I encourage you to check out these alerts on the website or find us on LinkedIn. With that, I'd like to turn to the subject of today's webinar, which is focused on the United States Toxic Substance Control Act PBT Rule. During this webinar, we have knowledgeable presenters who will be walking us through the PBT Rule fact sheet that was created for IAEG members in their supply chain. During the discussion, we will be focusing on the background of TSCA, a summary of the regulations and chemicals impacted, important dates and deadlines, and risks that IAEG membership should be aware of when conducting business within the U.S. There's a lot of detail in these rules to absorb. We recognize that. So we have included a couple poll questions that are scattered throughout to help review a few key points from the rules. So look for those to pop up, and our presenters will introduce those when they come, but feel free to answer those as they came up. And Madison will be helping shepherd us throughout it a little bit. At the end of the presentation, we'll be opening it up for chat for questions, as Madison indicated, so please feel free to enter those questions as we go through this presentation so we can make sure to try and answer those if we can. If we can't get to them during the webinar, we will definitely follow up with you all after. Just a little housekeeping. Please note that the fact sheet in this webinar are being provided in good faith for informational purposes only and is based on the best available information. It's really to be relied upon only at the user's risk. IAEG and the authors of the material make no representation or warranties with regards to its completeness, and no liability will be accepted for damages or of any nature whatsoever resulting from the use of reliance on the information included. All rights reserved for IAEG, and no part of this fact sheet or webinar constitutes legal advice. So I'd like to, as I've already introduced myself, I'm fortunate to have the opportunity to introduce our 2 presenters today. Lisa Brown will be the first of our 2 presenters. Lisa has worked at Lockheed Martin for 30+ years where she is the TSCA program lead for the Lockheed Martin Corporate Environmental Safety and Health Organization. She's also the ISO 14001, 45001 Enterprise Certification Team Leader, as well as other areas of responsibility. Lisa is a Work Group 9's lead on the chemical and environmental regulation. She holds a Master of Science in Public Health degree specializing in environmental science from Tulane University School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine, and a Bachelor of Science degree in Biology from Tulane University Newcomb College. Alongside Lisa, Tim Sheehan will be presenting. Tim is an engineering fellow at Raytheon Technologies, leading chemical regulatory compliance and risk management activities. Tim has over 40 years of management experience in chemical and environmental safety and occupational risk management in private consulting, manufacturing, and government settings. He is a retired U.S. Air Force officer and has a B.S. in chemical engineering and an M.S. in environmental engineering, both from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He is board certified in safety and industrial hygiene and is a professional engineer at the engineer in the U.S. state of Massachusetts. Lisa and Tim, thank you guys both for leading the presentation today. So with that, Tim, I will turn it over to you to kick us off on TSCA PBT.
Great, Lindsay. Thanks so much. Hey, everybody. This is Tim. As Lindsay mentioned, what we're focused on here are these 5 PBT rules that were issued by the US EPA back in January under Section 6H of TSCA. The rules were intended to address risks associated with these materials in the environment primarily. They are persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic. And so these were, again, promulgated to address risks posed to primarily the environment, but through the environment, obviously, to human health from their use in commerce. So the 5 regulated PBTs you can see on the slide there. We'll go through them quickly. A lot of tongue twisters and acronyms in these chemicals. So DecaBDE ether is the first one. You can see the CAS number underneath that one, and the regulatory citation that governs that is associated with the PBT rule. Next one is phenol isopropylated phosphate 3,1, CAS number 6893741-7. You can see with its citation. Third is 2,4,6 tris-tert-butylphenol, or 2,4,6-TTBP. Its CAS number and citation there. Pentachlorophenol is the third one with its citation there. And then the fourth one, Hexachlorobutadiene, or HCBD. These PBTs are all pertinent to varying degrees in the aerospace and defense industry and in its supply chain. We're going to discuss the specific prohibitions, restrictions, other compliance requirements for each of these chemicals. However, unless otherwise indicated, the prohibitions and restrictions of the PBT rules do not apply to the distribution and commerce of any of the PBTs as a substance or any product or article containing the PBT that has been previously sold or supplied to, quote unquote, an end user. And that is defined in 40 CFR 751-403, the definitions portion of this, as any person who purchased or acquired a finished good for purposes other than resale. So this exception in the example is given in 40 CFR 751-401, and the example that the EPA provides in the regulation is that of a consumer that previously purchased a formulation containing the PBT that no longer wants to use it and either sells it to another end user, for instance, or donates it to a charity. So a similar thing could also apply to, for instance, a business that purchases a PBT containing article, not for resale, maybe a part in a machine to produce their end product, and then has no further use for that particular machine, and either sells it to another business or provides it in charity, like the EPA example. The intention there is really what's key. They didn't intend to purchase that PBT, one of the PBTs in the product, and then sell that PBT in the end product to another customer. So that's kind of like the distinction there. So the other thing that I was going to mention too is that these PBT rules don't apply to the disposal of any of the regulated PBTs, and including the import, processing, and distribution and commerce of the PBT, the product or article that contains it, as long as it is for the purposes of disposal. And then finally, the other thing that's exempted from all the PBT rules is our research and development. And it's defined in 40 CFR 751 403 as being exclusively for basic research and not for the development of new products and not for the enhancement of new products. So as long as they're doing basic research, that's fine. But otherwise, the other two, enhancement and product development, would be covered by the prohibitions, restrictions, and other compliance requirements contained in the PBTs rules. So anyway, those general exemptions are listed on the next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to kind of go through that slide and explain some additional details. So, Lisa.
Thanks, Tim. Those were tongue twisters, so thanks a lot. The statute that is the framework for the subject chemical regulations is the United States Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA, which was enacted on October 11th, 1976 by the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, which is the United States Environmental Regulatory Authority. Unless exempt, most chemical substances are regulated by TSCA with the aim of protecting human health and the environment. TSCA was revised in 2016 by the Frank-Lautenberg Act with revisions that had a big impact on the manner in which chemicals are managed and how they're tracked, how they're evaluated, and how they're disclosed. The Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, it delineates the United States regulations. And if you recall the structure of the CFR, TSCA is addressed within subchapter R, Part 700 through 799. Now, Part 751 establishes the requirements pursuant to Section 6H of TSCA, regulating the manufacture and the import and the processing, the distribution and commerce, the use and the disposal of certain PBT chemical substances and mixtures. Now, as we break down Part 751, we will get to the subject of this webinar. And in order to address unreasonable risk associated with chemical substances, the Code of Federal Regulations specifically addresses the prohibitions, the restrictions on the manufacturing, processing, and distribution and commerce of the 5 PBTs addressed earlier, as well as other compliance requirements. Note again that the several general exemptions from the prohibitions, restrictions in the PBT rules. However, there are no general exemptions from other applicable regulatory requirements such as record keeping.
So the first one we're going to look at is DecaBDE. It is almost exclusively used as a flame retardant in articles. Its primary purpose. It's been used in a variety of plastics and polymers and composite materials, as well as textiles, adhesives, sealants, coatings, inks, and as a result shows up in the articles such as aerospace and defense and automotive parts, rubber casings and wire and cable, just to name a few applications. The DecaBDE rule establishes a prohibition on all manufacture, including import, under TSCA. Manufacture includes imports, and processing of DecaBDE in products or articles containing the PBT. This prohibition became effective on March 8th of this year. However, there are several exemptions and exclusions associated with this prohibition as listed on the slide. For example, the processing, distribution, and commerce for the recycling of plastic containing DecaBDE and the products and articles made from such recycled plastics, are exempt, as long as you don't add any additional DecaBDE to the plastic. There's also some delayed requirements also indicated on the slide. For example, the distribution and commerce of DecaBDE and products or articles containing DecaBDE will be prohibited, but not until January 6th of next year. The manufacture, including the import, processing and distribution and commerce for use in parts installed in and distributed as part of new aerospace vehicles, loosely interpreted to be airplanes and helicopters and the like, including their replacement parts, are not prohibited until January 8th of 2024. 751-405 has the details on the DecaBDE prohibitions. Note that the term process under TSCA includes the PBTs that have been included in articles, for example, as a constituent of applied coating. Like other PBT rules, the DecaBDE rule requires record keeping. All of them do, in fact. After March 8th, 2021, the compliance date, ordinary business records related to compliance with the rules, prohibitions, restrictions, and other provisions must be retained related to the manufacturing/importing, processing, or distribution and commerce of DecaBDE or DecaBDE containing products or articles. The records may include such things as invoices or bills of lading. There are exemptions even to these record-keeping requirements as delineated also on the slide. The records must include a statement that DecaBDE or the DecaBDE containing products or articles comply with the PBT rule prohibitions identified at 40 CFR 751-405A specifically. It is also worth noting that the DecaBDE is also classified as a persistent organic pollutant, or a POP, under the Stockholm Convention and is listed in Annex A of the Convention for elimination. However, the United States has not ratified its support for the Stockholm Convention. So next slide, please. So I guess we're going to check your either attention span or knowledge or both here. So if you could take a moment just to answer this question, and we'll see how people are doing and paying attention here. So thanks. I suppose I should read it just in case anybody doesn't have access. Oh, we're all done, I guess. Oh, two answers. How many people we got on this call? Here we go.
Tim, I think you were supposed to sing the Jeopardy song.
Yeah, instead we talked about
Yeah, I'm slow today. I haven't had my third cup of coffee. So again, the question was, again, go ahead, share the answer.
Okay, so this is what we have got as people, and we've got about 75% in the right.
So the answer is true. So there's no prizes or penalties for right or incorrect answers. So, I mean, this is a free webinar after all. So I guess the next topic is turn it back over to Lisa. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Madison.
Okay. So now the chemical phenol isopropylated phosphate 3,1 or PIP3,1 has sparked a lot of interest. Applications of this chemical include use as a plasticizer. It's used as a flame retardant, as an additive in hydraulic fluids, lubricants, and greases, and in various industrial coatings, adhesives, and sealants. The regulation currently contains the following prohibitions. With some exceptions as identified, processing and distribution and commerce of PIP3,1, including PIP3,1 containing products or articles, was prohibited after March 8, 2021. Also, processing and distribution and commerce of PIP3,1 for use in adhesives and sealants, processing and distribution and commerce of PIP3,1 containing products for use in adhesives and sealants, and processing and distribution and commerce of PIP3,1 containing adhesives and sealants are prohibited after January 6, 2025. So that's after January 6, 2025. Also, all processing and distribution and commerce of PIP3,1 for use in photographic printing articles and PIP3,1 containing photographic printing articles is prohibited after January 1st, 2022. So that's coming up. A list of exclusions to these prohibitions can be found at 40 CFR 751.407 paragraph B. For example, PIP3,1 for use in lubricants and greases, PIP3,1 containing products for use in lubricants and greases, and PIP3,1 containing lubricants and greases are excluded. Also, after March 8, 2021, all persons were prohibited from releasing PIP31 to water during manufacturing, processing, and distribution and commerce of PIP31 and PIP31 containing products. And all persons are required to follow all applicable regulations and best management practices preventing the release of PIP31 and PIP31 containing products to water during commercial use. In terms of record-keeping requirements, after March 8, 2021, persons who manufactured, processed, or distributed in commerce PIP31 or PIP31 containing products or articles must maintain ordinary business records, such as invoices and bills of lading, related to compliance with the prohibitions, restrictions, and other provisions. Furthermore, records must include a statement that the PIP31 or the PIP31 containing products or articles are in compliance with 40 CFR 751.407A. There are some exclusions for which these record-keeping requirements do not apply. Please refer to 40 CFR 751.407, paragraph D4. Now, downstream notification requirements also exist, in including the requirement for manufacturers of PIP31 for any use after March 8, 2021, to notify persons to whom PIP31 is shipped in writing of the restrictions regarding PIP31. This must occur prior to or concurrent with the shipment. Also, processors or distributors in commerce of PIP31 or PIP31 containing products for any use after July 6, 2021 had to, prior to or concurrent with the shipment, notify persons to whom PIP31 is shipped in writing of PIP31 restrictions. Now, the method of notification includes specific language in the safety data sheet or on the label. The methods of notification are delineated in the regulations at 751.407, paragraph E3. It should be added that there are certain activities for which the downstream notification provisions do not apply, and those activities are also addressed in the regulations. We will be discussing later in this presentation a temporary no-action assurance that was issued by EPA regarding PIP31 for use in articles and articles that include PIP31. Now, we're going to test your knowledge again, and I hope you were paying attention. I tried to give you a subtle hint. So, processing and distribution in commerce of PIP31 for use in adhesives and sealants, PIP31 containing products for use in adhesives and sealants, and PIP31 containing adhesives and sealants is prohibited after March 8, 2021. True or false?
How am I doing, Lisa?
Good, good, love it.
Although we did get one comment that it's too early for quizzes in the West Coast. I'm very sorry.
I would agree. Maybe on the East Coast.
That's reasonable.
All right, I'll share the answer because we've got a back-to-back poll question on this one. So here we go. We've got, this one we're split. So maybe half of the group needs their coffee because the answer to this question was false.
Okay, yeah, false. EPA has allowed the processing and distribution and commerce of PIP31 and adhesives and sealants until January 6, 2025. I stress that date, January 6, 2025. Refer to CFR 751.407 for other phase-in dates.
Sounds like we might need a remedial class after this.
Well,
okay,
I think that's kind of the point. There's a lot of information with PIP31 and a lot of detail. So if that's a substance of interest, you should probably check the regulation real close.
Yep, that's right. So let's try this again. Business records such as invoices and bills of lading must be kept for 3 years after the record has been generated for finished products or articles made from recycled plastic containing PBT1. True or false?
Tim, we need some music again.
All right, I'm slow here. I do something different, but nothing's coming to mind.
I can't remember the Wheel of Fortune one.
You put that in my mind, I'll never forget it.
We have quite a few people responded, so I think I will share the results. But this one, the group has not done as well on this one. So the actual answer to this one is false as well.
Yeah, this category, along with the process of recycling plastic for products or articles containing PIP31, provided that no new PIP31 is added during the recycling process, is exempt from this record-keeping requirement. And you can see this at 40 CFR 751.407, paragraph D4. Okay, turning it over to you now,
Great.
Tim, I think.
Write down the citation quickly. So number 3 is our friend here, 246 TTBP. There's some very simple requirements here related to the PBT and chemical products. All distribution and commerce of this PBT and chemical products is prohibited after January 6, 2026, if the concentrations are above 0.3% by weight in containers with a volume less than 35 gallons. After January 6, 2026, all processing and distribution and commerce of 246 TDPP oil and lubricant additives at any concentration above 0.3% by weight is prohibited. And after January 6, 2026 as well, distributors of 246 TTBP must maintain ordinary business records related to the compliance with the prohibitions, restrictions, and other provisions in the rule. This includes records such as invoices and bills of lading, such as the other PBT compounds. So back to you, Lisa.
Okay, pentachlorophenol. So pentachlorophenol, or PCTP, is the next regulated PBT substance, and all manufacturing, importing, and processing of it and PCTP containing products or articles is prohibited unless concentrations of PCTP are at or below 1% by weight. This prohibition was effective after March 8, 2021. So we have a trigger there of 1% by weight. So another prohibition that exists for PCTP is the prohibition of all distribution and commerce of PCTP or PCTP containing products or articles, unless the concentration of PCTP is at or below 1% by weight. This prohibition is effective after January 6, 2022. So in terms of record-keeping requirements, after March 8, 2021, ordinary business records must be retained related to compliance with the aforementioned prohibitions, restrictions, and other provisions. This includes records such as invoices and bills of lading.
The last PBT we're going to talk about is hexachlorobutadiene. All manufacturing, importing, processing, and distribution and commerce of HCBD or HCBD containing products or articles was prohibited after March 8th of this year. There are some exceptions to the prohibition that are not expected to be generally applicable to the aerospace and defense industry. For example, the unintentional production of HCBD as a byproduct in the production of chlorinated solvents is exempted from the prohibition, nor is the processing or distribution and commerce of HCBD at burning as a waste fuel covered by the prohibitions. As with the other PBT rules, after March 8th of this year, businesses must maintain records that related to the compliance with the rules, prohibitions, restrictions, and other provisions. As before, these may include records such as invoices and bills of lading. So back to you, Lisa.
Okay, so let's look at this very carefully, some key dates here. Um, EPA published final rules for PBTs in January 2021, and the rules became effective in February 2021. However, EPA provided a 60-day comment period on the chemicals, which ended on May 17, 2021, and also issued a 180-day no action assurance for PIP31 in March 2021, in which EPA exercised its enforcement discretion regarding the prohibitions on processing and distribution of PIP31 for use in articles and the articles to which PIP31 have been added. Various trade groups have provided comments to EPA. However, EPA has not yet provided any revised regulations. The no action assurance expires on September 4th, 2021. There are also other key dates referenced within the specific sections of the regulation for each chemical. So as I kind of stated earlier, it's very important that you go back through the Code of Federal Regulations and you look specifically at each of these 5 PBTs to see what the compliance dates are. That's very important.
So this slide obviously talks about the risk of noncompliance with TSCA generally, and the noncompliance liability would also apply to these rules as well, obviously. So as with many other rules, new rules, these rules have been particularly challenging for industry to comply with to varying degrees, depending upon what rule you're talking about. So the number of concerns have been raised by industry and private parties, in fact, about these rules, about the ability to comply with them. Many of the large trade associations, including the aerospace and defense trade associations, have provided public comments back to the EPA on the rule as it was being developed, and also after EPA had recently reopened comment period on the rules to get feedback from industry on how, on some of the challenges that they were facing in complying with them. So, and some of the concerns that were raised as part of the initial rulemaking and as part of the reopened comment period recently include such things as, there's lack of sufficient phase-in time for the prohibitions. Once the final rule was enacted, most of the prohibitions came into force in early March. It didn't really afford the industry sufficient time, according to them, to prepare for them. So they've led to obsoleting, for instance, of some in-process materials after the prohibition dates. In other words, you had some formulation on your shelf that you were using to make your products, and then all of a sudden there was a prohibition. So what do you do with that particular material? You would have to obsolete it somehow, and that created obviously some waste management issues in the supply chain. The biggest issue, though, I think, is the underlying issue is the lack of data, particularly about article content in our supply chain, and so that really affected both a couple of issues. During the review of the developing regulation, I don't think that the industry had enough information about these PBTs in their supply chain, particularly related to articles and possibly even formulations as well, in order to be able to provide accurate and meaningful comments completely back to EPA. And as a result, when the rule was finalized, I think that the industries, including the aerospace and defense industry, were caught a bit flat-footed. And then finally realizing that after the fact, after the prohibitions were already in effect, what the extent of their dependency was on these substances in their supply chain, and then having to scramble a bit to comply with them. So the applicability to prohibitions to materials and articles in commerce before the prohibition date. In other words, things were being passed through the supply chain, often with very little information, data related to them, and then they were provided to end users after the date, or there were contractual obligations to provide them in violation of the law. So in some cases, some of the the downstream companies, like many in the aerospace and defense industry, were kind of caught between their obligations to comply with the rules versus their contractual obligations to meet their customers' requirements. So created some pretty difficult situations, I think. And some of the PBTs we found out after the fact, after the final rule, were quite common in materials and articles in ways that hadn't been anticipated. They were, again, very limited information coming through the supply chain. We found out afterwards, for instance, that PIP-31 is a pretty common flame retardant used in electronics. That something I think that many of the downstream larger manufacturing industries didn't realize, that depend on the electronic supply chain, didn't realize until after the rule was in effect. So, and the other thing that was kind of I think is challenging, that there's no de minimis in these rules at all. If the presence of those particular substances in the products often trigger the prohibitions, and there's no as a result of having no de minimis value, it's kind of I guess it's a trade-off between how much effort needs to go in to comply with these rules versus the benefit that comes out of them in protecting, the environment and human health. So that's kind of another thing that's kind of, it's very challenging, like I said, and inexpensive. When you say challenging, that often that means it's expensive to comply. So it's not been demonstrated through the rulemaking process that that the risks have been addressed by the investment needed to comply with these rules. So, in fact, I would just, as an additional aside, PBT Section 6H doesn't require a risk assessment like the other parts of TSCA Section 6, and so there is really, it was just by skipping that step, there was a fast track to rulemaking that may have left some risks unaddressed, and possibly even some risks that were overstated and not fully addressed by the regulatory action. While there are concerns about the regulation, the International Aerospace Environmental Group has taken a proactive approach to managing these risks for these substances and other substances like them in the aerospace and defense industry and its supply chain. Lindsay mentioned earlier that Workgroup 9 is tracking the development of regulations such as these and others, communicating potential impacts to the aerospace and defense community and its supply chain. In addition, we have 3 other working groups within IAEG that are actively working to create tools and resources that can be used by the aerospace and defense industry and its supply chain to comply with rules such as these. Workgroup 1, I know there are many IAEG members in here, so this is kind of maybe old hat for you, but for some of the folks that aren't heavily involved, this would be very valuable information. Workgroup 1 has the Aerospace and Defense Declarable Substances List, or the ADDSL. It's a list of substances relevant to the aerospace and defense industry that are likely to be or currently restricted or subject to reporting requirements by global chemical regulations impacting industries such as TSCA, EU REACH, Korea REACH, Stockholm Convention, etc. The ADDSL is intended to be used by companies to identify listed substances and article products by obtaining data from the supply chain through the declaration process. Amongst many other substances, the ADDSL contains all of the EPA PBTs. Workgroup 5 is another group of IAEG member companies that are actively working to track substances through the aerospace and defense supply chain that are of importance to the industry and likely require authorization under EU REACH. Amongst many others, DecaBDE is one of the substances of concern noted in the group's pipeline for evaluation. And finally, Workgroup 2 is working to solve some of the issues. A group of IAEG member companies that are looking at the qualification of replacement materials and substances that are critical to the industry and its customers. They put out external reports on materials such as hard chrome plating, and there are a number of ongoing projects within the work group to replace critical materials. So check out the IAEG website, www.iaeg.com, for more information on these work groups and other IAEG activities. So, and back to Lisa.
So Tim, to answer your question on the previous slide, is it worth the risk? I don't think so. I don't want to go to jail, and I don't think anyone wants to have to pay any of those hefty TSCA violation fees. So what do you do next? It's important that each site takes some steps to determine if the TSCA PBT regulations applies to your site. You should review your chemical inventory and work with your supply chain to determine if any of the 5 PBTs are present as ingredients in formulations or in articles. You should also determine if your company manufactures, imports, processes, or distributes in commerce any of the 5 PBT chemicals, and if the regulations impact the manner in which the chemical is used at your site. You should also determine if your company uses PBT chemicals in the manufacture of your hardware products, both articles and components. And finally, you should be familiar with effective dates and be aware of any modifications to the regulations. Pay attention to those dates. And yes, when EPA comes out with any revised regulations, make sure that you're reviewing those to see if there's any changes. So there are still a number of unknowns with this rule. The comment period for providing feedback to EPA closed in May, and as we understand it, EPA is working to review the comments that were provided in the public docket. EPA has not announced any changes yet to or updates on this rule, nor has there been any announcement about extending the no action assurance that is set to expire in September. I think a lot of us are just operating under a wait and see model while still preparing for compliance under the rule until we know more from EPA. So we have another question for you. The no action assurance applies to all 5 PBT chemicals, true or false?
And this is the last question for the day, so.
Promises, promises.
The last prepared question for the day. Let's put it that
yes,
way.
true.
And again, if you get this right, you don't get a car or anything like that, not even a gold star. Just a personal satisfaction knowing that you paid attention to what Lisa was just talking about.
I don't know, Madison, is there a virtual high five in this platform or anything?
You know what? There isn't, but if there was, we would give them to all of you on the line this morning. All right. More of the group is correct this time, so there we go.
Okay, so the no action assurance applies to all 5 PBT chemicals. The answer is false. EPA issued a temporary 180-day no action assurance exercising its enforcement discretion regarding the prohibitions on processing and distribution of PIP-31 for use in articles, and the articles to which PIP-31 has been added. So PIP-31 is the key there. Okay, so IAEG has provided links to outside sources where you can easily find additional information on this regulation and the associated final rules. If any of these substances are important to your company, we would encourage you to review these links to find more detail on what was covered today.
Great. Thank you, Lisa and Tim. Let me see where we are now. For taking us through this rule. Wanted to open it up for questions. If anybody has questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can go through them. There aren't any at the moment, but it's a lot of information that that Tim and Lisa went through this morning. I definitely understand that, but you know, if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll see if we can get an answer. Okay.
Here's a question. Where are the slides going to be located? Where's the presentation and the slides going to be accessible?
So the presentation is being recorded. It will be posted on the LinkedIn, or I'm sorry, on IAEG.com under the Workgroup 9 folder. So, and it will be available after that. And then Madison, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe anyone that has access to this link should be able to go back to the link and see the recording at any point once it's done.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So essentially following today's program, when we end the webinar, the same link that you used to join the webinar this morning, you'll be able to join in that same way. And within the handout section of the platform, which is that last blue circle along the bottom of your screen, that has the downloadable PDF copy of the slides for you to review with maybe share with your colleagues or what have you.
In your supply chain.
Okay, so I guess I have a question for you to throw out there and see if you guys have thoughts on it. We talked about the no action assurance for PIP 3.1. Curious if you guys have any ideas on what enforcement would look like for these substances. How, once the no action assurance goes up, I mean, what would EPA be looking for and how would they be looking for it? You guys have thoughts on that?
Oh, I
can
offer my opinion of it anyway. I think that I think the comments that the EPA is getting back, and they probably had a few of these even in the during the rulemaking process, is that the industry, especially the downstream industries like ours, don't generally have the insight into the supply chain and the chemical composition of their products. Prior to this rulemaking, there really wasn't much in the way of regulation of these substances, with the one exception maybe of DecaBDE being in the Stockholm Convention, as I mentioned earlier. So certainly there was no requirement, regulatory or otherwise, for suppliers through the supply chain to provide that type of data to their downstream customers. So when the regulation took effect, for substances like PIP 3.1, I don't think we being the industry really understood the extent and gravity of the use of the substance in our products. So I think they're getting an earful about that particular issue from the commenters, and I think that you're going to see beyond the no action assurance, you're going to see some adjustment either in the requirement itself or in the phase-in date that is going to be needed for those prohibitions. So, and I'm hoping, my hope, and I think we've provided this comment to EPA a couple of times through a couple of industry associations, there needs to be some work on behalf of the industry or by the government to kind of foster the need for increased transparency in the supply chain for substances such as these. So, we went for a long time without any insight into the chemical composition of products. For the substance, all of a sudden we have substances that are regulated, including in articles, and that extends to other things. We're having one now for instance, for PFAS reporting that could theoretically cover articles as well. But we don't have that data, and EPA, I'm sure, is hearing about that again over and over again. That there needs to be something done to make an expectation, a greater expectation, and better support for acquiring that data through the supply chain.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tim. That's a good insight. And then I got one last question for you. Is there are 5 substances here. I guess, Tim, maybe it is for you because you're familiar with the ADDSL. Do they all seem to have a similar impact for aerospace and defense, or are there ones that you see that have, that are of a more likeliest, more significant concern?
PIP 3.1 is the hands down winner in this group. But I don't think this point was made, but there could be more coming. I mean, there might be other ones. Yeah. I think the reason why, for instance, DecaBDE, which is probably number 2, isn't as much of a concern, is again because it's generally regulated internationally. It's a POP, so that theoretically at least the supply chain is a bit suppressed in the rest of the world, if you will, for that particular substance, but not in the U.S. But I would say definitely PIP 3.1. That was, we found, again, after the fact, after the prohibitions took effect and restrictions and other compliance requirements, we found, we kind of realized, the extent of the use of that substance in our supply chain. And that, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, has created huge problems for us.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Tim, I think I would agree with you on that substance.
Right.
And if I could just take a moment to just a couple of seconds here, just to clarify one thing. I was, what I was mentioning was, the cost benefit analysis of regulating these substances in vanishing small amounts, the benefit to society versus the cost of examining your supply chain and determining that you need to take action in order to comply. That's what I was referring to. And I think, Lisa, you kind of caught the tail end of that. You obviously need to comply with the law. I mean, if that's the regulation, that's the regulation. And if you don't comply with it, obviously they run the risk of of the penalties that we had indicated on that slide. But again, it costs a lot to manage and control the risks associated with these substances in the supply chain versus if in some cases, if it's just a minor constituent of a article or formulation, then, is it worth the effort to do that? So I guess that's specifically what I was referring to.
Right. And that was more about the rulemaking process and some of the concerns that you kind of mentioned, that it doesn't require risk management or risk evaluation, and it was kind of fast tracked. So it may have been something that could have been
so how do you gauge the benefit,
detail,
right?
Yeah, right. We did get one question from Julia. Are you aware of any aerospace industries that will be able to identify these chemical substances in articles via global supply chain? Has anybody heard examples of anyone that has been successfully able to identify it? Or is it still kind of
Well, we've been within IAEG. We've been advocating. We developed a declaration process and advocating its use in our industry and in our supply chain. Certainly, that could have helped us, I think, if it was more fully developed. To identify our dependency as an industry on these substances, and then we would have been better informed and more prepared to take action to comply with them, I think. But to answer your question, no. I know that there are companies that do have declaration processes. My own company has one, for instance. I guess I would just say characterize the implementation as incomplete.
Yeah.
I
think
guess
there's
my
a
answer
lot of opportunity. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, I was just going to say my answer is yes and ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Making progress.
Yeah. Right. And I think it's interesting to think about, and to take the tools like IAEG's developed, and this is something that's quite robust. It's something that's been developed, and something that member companies should really consider using to try and help comply with these requests, because I don't think, as you mentioned, I don't think this is the last one, and we just continue to see new policies and regulations coming out that are becoming, increasing the scrutiny on the substances that are present in our products. So it's
regulating
it's
articles, both in all over the world, really.
Yep, right, exactly. So we're just seeing kind of an uptick in it here in the U.S. lately. All right, great. Well, let me see. There was. Do you know if any comments were made regarding impact on performance, such as flammability and finding replacements? I'm not sure.
I am not aware of any.
I'm not either, but
on weather.
Yeah, I would assume that there's got to be some, because obviously that's the other side of the coin. If you're going to take, or you're going to limit the supply of particularly flame retardants, what impact does that have on product safety? And I've often wondered that myself, and if the brominated flame retardants, they're under the gun everywhere. They're persistent, bioaccumulative, in many cases toxic. If they're going away, what's the next generation of flame retardants? And are they, there are obviously lots of technical issues. Are they as effective as the legacy substances? Are they available? Do they have other issues that might lead to increased regulation? It's a big question right now.
Yeah. All right.
But it is a concern. I don't think that's been characterized, to be honest with you. Sorry.
Right. No, that's fine. I think it's a good question, and a question that I think that's one thing with flame retardants, that you need it to be effective, and that those replacement substances is important to have established before you eliminate it.
The other, if I could make one more point too, there is, oh, sorry.
Sure.
Can I make,
No, sure.
These PBTs, like I mentioned earlier, they're not generally regulated in other regions. For instance, PIP31, it is listed in Europe as indicated under COP as a PBT, but we're not seeing any intention to regulate it. And it, makes you wonder why that is. But so the inconsistency is also difficult for us, because they're targeting different substances, and they're regulated in an inconsistent fashion across the globe. It's another one of those things that really is creating challenges, putting it mildly, for the industry and its supply chain.
Yep. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt
well,
you.
I think no, that's fine. There aren't, and I don't see any additional questions in the chat, so we'll go ahead and draw that to a close. So let's wrap up here. So today's webinar, I'd like to thank Elisa and Tim for providing this overview and insight into this important regulation. And it's certainly going to have an impact on aerospace and defense companies and their supply chain. We'd also like to thank all of you for taking time to attend the webinar today. I know it was early for some, and maybe lunchtime for others. If you'd like to see more written information on the subject, again, I'd encourage you to check out the regulatory alert, as well as the fact sheet that we published on the subject, which are, as Madison mentioned, were in the resources. And then we encourage you to learn more about IAEG, which we're celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, and the work that we're doing on behalf of aerospace and defense industry. So explore the website. There's a number of topic-specific working groups doing really great work, and it's very, very meaningful. So we also encourage you to find us on LinkedIn. We've recently set up our LinkedIn account and have been pretty active on that. So take a look for us there. And with that, thank you again for attending today's webinar, and have a wonderful day.
Great. Thanks, everyone.